Picture a street the width of 2 carts passing each other, barely. Now fill it with 400 people living in buildings that were never meant to hold more than 100. Add cesspits leaking into the soil beneath the foundations. Add a water pump that everyone on the street uses every single day, because it's the only clean water for 3 blocks in any direction. Add the August heat, which does things to organic matter in enclosed spaces that I genuinely hope you never experience firsthand. Add a baby who died 2 nights ago, whose soiled nappies were rinsed and tossed into the cesspit directly below the basement of number 40. That's Broad Street, Soho. Summer 1854. The most dangerous 50 yards in England. The site of the worst cholera outbreak in London's recorded history. A place where, within the span of 10 days, more than 500 people will die within a quarter-mile radius, and nearly 3/4 of the remaining population will flee in pure terror, abandoning their homes, their furniture, their livelihoods, everything, just to get away from whatever invisible thing is killing them. A place where one doctor with a map, a notebook, and an almost deranged amount of patience will do something that changes medicine forever. And a place where you, specifically, are going to wake up on the morning of September the 1st, 1854, and realise that the odd smell you've been trying to ignore for the past 2 days is not the tannery. It's never been the tannery. I make these history stories, and I genuinely don't know who's listening to this at 2 in the morning. Maybe you're someone who likes the idea of falling asleep to the sound of a Victorian water crisis. Maybe you're a medical professional who enjoys hearing about diseases that used to kill thousands in the time it takes to plan a dinner party. Maybe you just like the way the words sound when everything's dark and quiet and the day is finally done. Either way, get comfortable, settle in, here we go. You don't wake up to church bells. You wake up to a sound you've never heard before, and for a long disoriented moment you can't place it. It's coming from downstairs, from the room below yours, where old Mrs. Carrow lives with her husband and their daughter. A low rhythmic sound, almost like someone rocking in a chair, except wrong, wet, strained. You lie on your back in the narrow cot you've slept in for 8 months, staring at the ceiling, listening. Then the smell hits you. It hits you the way smells do in small rooms with bad ventilation in late summer, all at once, with no warning, no gentle introduction, just a wall of it rising through the floorboards like something living. You know the smells of Broad Street by now. 8 months in Soho, and you've catalogued every layer. The coal smoke that sits at head height on cold mornings. The brew house on the corner, which breathes out something sweet and yeasty that you've actually grown to like. The bone boilers 2 streets over, which you have not grown to like, and which you suspect nobody ever does. The horses, the rubbish that accumulates along the gutters between the nights when the scavengers come through. The cesspits, which exhale particularly strongly after rain or after heat. You know all of those smells. This is not any of those smells. This is something else, something sharper and thinner, like milk gone wrong, but underneath that, something that has no comparison in your experience, something that belongs in a category of smell you have no name for yet. You will learn the name for it before this week is over. They call it the rice water smell, the signature of Asiatic cholera in its advanced stages. By the time you can smell it this strongly, it means someone is very ill, or someone is already dead. You get up. The room is small, smaller than the room you had at home in Wiltshire in the village of Bishopstone, where your parents still live and where your father still works the land for Lord Pemberton's estate, same as his father did, and his father before that. You came to London with a letter your schoolmaster wrote for you. 2 years of education above what most boys in Bishops never got, enough arithmetic and reading to be useful in a shop, a careful and legible hand, and the schoolmaster's genuine belief that you had something, that if you went to London, if you found the right position, you might become something more than what your father was. The letter got you a position as dispenser's boy at Crane & Sons pharmaceutical chemist, on Silver Street, 3 minutes' walk from where you're standing right now. Mr. Aldous Crane is not a gentleman. He is precise, which is different. He measures his words the same way he measures his compounds, exactly, with no excess, with no sentiment. He taught you in the first week that pharmacy is not kindness, it is accuracy, and a single misplaced decimal point is the difference between a remedy and a death. You've worked for him for 8 months. Your hands smell permanently of camphor and spirits of ammonia. You can identify 12 compounds by sight alone. You know how to make up a cough linctus, a fever draught, a plaster for a boil. You're paid 3 shillings and 6pence a week, which sounds like nothing, and functionally is nothing, but it includes the room above the bootmender's and 1 hot meal a day. You share the room with a boy named Samuel Holt, who came from Stoke-on-Trent 14 months ago, and's already absorbed enough of London to feel superior about it. Samuel is 18, same as you, and he works at the leather dressers on Carnaby Street. He's already awake, sitting on the edge of his cot, pulling on his boots with the careful concentration of a man who is pretending to be calmer than he is. "You hear that?" he says, without looking up. "Yes." "And the smell?" "Yes." He doesn't say anything else. He ties his boot, stands up, reaches for his jacket. "Should we check on them?" "Probably," you say. Neither of you moves for a moment. Then you hear Mrs. Carrow's daughter Eliza calling up through the floorboards. Her voice is high and thin and frightened, and what she's calling is your name. You've seen illness before. You've seen the village fevers that move through communities in winter. You've seen your younger sister with scarlet fever, her throat closing, her skin the colour of new bricks. You've been in Crane's shop for 8 months, and people come to dispensaries when they're ill, which means you've seen illness in many forms, the slow decline, the sudden crisis, the aftermath. You've never seen anything like what's in the room downstairs. John Carrow is 53 years old. He's a bookbinder on Poland Street, a stout, cheerful man who nods at you on the stairs every morning. He makes a particular joke about the weather every single day, regardless of what the weather is actually doing, a running commentary that you initially found annoying and have quietly come to depend on. This morning he's in his cot and he looks like someone has taken the substance out of him. Not just the energy, not just the colour, but the physical mass of the man. He looks thinner than he was yesterday, which is medically impossible except that you're looking at it and it's true. His eyes are sunken. His skin has a peculiar greyish quality, almost bluish in the folds around his lips, that you have seen illustrated in one of Mr. Crane's medical texts and hoped never to see in person. The sound is him, the breathing, and the smell is him. Eliza is 17, brown-haired, steady-handed in a crisis, and right now she's standing beside the cot with a basin and a cloth, doing what she can, which isn't much. She looks at you when you come in, and what's in her face is not panic. It's something worse than panic. It's the calm that comes after you've understood that panic isn't going to help, so you've set it aside for later, but the terror is still there underneath, and you can see it around her eyes. "He started in the night," she says. "Mum's gone for the doctor. Will you stay?" "Of course," you say. You pull up the wooden chair. You sit down. You take the cloth from the basin, wring it out, press it to John Caro's forehead, the way your mother used to do when you were a child and the fever came. The water in the basin is warm already. The room is already warm. Outside, Broad Street is beginning its morning noise. Carts, voices. The particular rhythm of a London street that doesn't know anything is wrong yet. You notice, with the part of your mind that is always cataloguing, always observing the way Mr. Crane taught you, that the basin of water by the bedside came from the pump. It always comes from the pump. Let me tell you about the pump. The Broad Street pump stands roughly in the middle of the street, on the north side, roughly equidistant from the brewery on one end and the workhouse on the other. It's a standard London parish pump installed in the 1840s, cast iron with a long handle and a spout and a small stone trough at the base where animals can drink. Every morning from about 5 o'clock onwards, you can set your watch by the line that forms at that pump. Women with buckets, boys with yokes and pails, servants from the better houses on the north side, dressed slightly better than everyone else, arriving slightly later, as if the social hierarchy of the street needs to be observed even when fetching water. The water tastes good, that's the thing. Most London water in 1854 tastes of one thing or another. The Thames water that the water companies pipe into the better houses has a particular quality that people describe charitably as minerals and uncharitably as all the things that everyone in London threw into the river upstream. The New River Company water is marginally better. The rainwater barrels that poorer households rely on have their own issues. The Broad Street pump produces water that tastes clean and cold and faintly of nothing in particular, which is as close to perfect as most people in this neighbourhood have ever tasted. There are people on neighbouring streets who make a point of coming to Broad Street specifically for the water, walking past their own pumps because the Broad Street water is better. This preference is going to kill several of them, because about 40 feet below that pump, through layers of clay and gravel and the accumulated organic matter of 2 centuries of dense urban habitation, there is a cesspit. And in that cesspit, in the last weeks of August 1854, something has happened that is invisible and odourless and swimming in the water that everyone on this street drinks every single day. The people who believe in miasma theory, which is nearly everyone, nearly all the doctors, nearly all the officials, nearly everyone who has an opinion about disease, would tell you the problem is the air, the smell, the bad air rising from the decaying matter in the streets, in the houses, in the open sewers. Miasma. The word comes from the Greek for pollution. The idea is that disease literally floats in the air, that bad smells carry illness, that if you can smell something rotten, you're breathing in sickness. This theory is wrong. It is catastrophically wrong. It is wrong in a way that has been contributing to the deaths of tens of thousands of people, not just here but across Europe, for decades. There's a man who knows it's wrong. He's been trying to prove it for 4 years. You'll meet him later. Right now you're sitting by John Caro's bedside wringing out a cloth in pump water, and outside the window the morning is getting on, and Broad Street still doesn't know what it's sitting on top of. Mr. Crane is not yet at the shop when you arrive at 7:15. This is unusual. Mr. Crane arrives at 6:30 every morning, opens the shutters himself, starts the coals in the small stove at the back, and has the dispensary organised and ready before you show up at 7. He is more reliable than the church bells, and the church bells on this street are extremely reliable. The shutters are closed, the door is locked. You wait. At 7:30, Mr. Crane appears from the direction of Peter Street, walking quickly, with the particular focus of a man who has already made several decisions this morning and doesn't need to be questioned about them. He's a narrow man, mid-50s, with grey side whiskers and the kind of permanently ink-stained fingers that speak to a lifetime of precise record-keeping. He sees you outside the shop, registers your presence and says, "Have you heard? I heard something this morning, in the room below mine." He unlocks the door without responding to this, goes straight to the stove, starts the coals with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done it 10,000 times. "Mrs. Pierce from number 39, he says, speaking to the stove rather than to you, died last night. A woman on New Street this morning, and there are reports of 3 others from the court off Silver Street." A pause. He adds coal, shuts the stove door. "That's 5 cases in 12 hours that I know of. There will be more." "The Carrow family," you say. "Mr. Carrow is very ill." Mr. Crane turns around and looks at you. His expression doesn't change exactly, but something in it settles, like a decision being confirmed. "I expected this," he says. You blink. "The water," he says simply. "I've been watching the reports from the Registrar General, the patterns, the clusters. It's always around the water sources." He says this without triumph, without the energy of a man who enjoys being right, more with the exhaustion of a man who has been right about something terrible for quite some time. "Unfortunately, I don't have the standing to make anyone listen, and nobody else has the data." He turns back to his shelves, starts pulling down jars. "Today will be difficult," he says. "Stay close, measure everything twice, and stop touching your face." This is as close to a speech as Mr. Crane ever gives. The morning accelerates. That's the word for it later, when you try to describe it to Samuel, or when you write it in the letter home to your mother that you keep starting and abandoning because you don't know how to explain what happened without terrifying her. It accelerated. The morning began slowly, with John Carrow and the basin and the thin sound of his breathing. And then something shifted, and the day began arriving faster and faster, as if time itself could feel what was coming and wanted to get there. By 8 o'clock, there are 2 more people at Crane's door. By 9, there are 6. By 10, the shop is something between a dispensary and a triage station, and Mr. Crane is behind the counter, working with a focused speed you've never seen from him, measuring and compounding and speaking in low, exact sentences, and you are running errands. Running is the right word. Your legs are learning the geography of Broad Street and the surrounding courts and alleys, in a way that is different from your usual knowledge of them, the knowledge of someone walking between home and work every day. This is different. This is urgent geography. You learn which alleys go through and which end in walls. You learn which doors to knock on and which to push open. You learn, within the space of a morning, which houses on which courts have already lost someone. The houses on the courts are worse than the houses on Broad Street itself. This is important and worth understanding, because in 1854 the physical structure of where you live directly determines how likely you are to die of waterborne disease, and the people in the courts are already closer to the edge. A court is what happens when you take a street and fill in every available space behind the street front buildings with more buildings. Smaller buildings. Buildings thrown up in the 1820s and 1830s when the population of London was exploding and landlords discovered you could charge almost as much for a single room in a windowless court as for a room facing the street. The courts of Soho have no ventilation to speak of. They share one, sometimes two privies between 20 households. The cesspits beneath those privies haven't been emptied in months. The air in a court in summer, particularly a still August morning with no wind, has a physical quality to it, a thickness, a warmth that's nothing like the warmth of sun on your skin. You run through 3 different courts before noon, and in each one you can tell immediately where the illness is by the smell. Not the miasma smell that everyone believes causes the disease. The other smell, the specific one that woke you this morning. It marks out certain houses the way a landlord might mark out a condemned building, and the people in those houses are in various stages of something that your 8 months in a dispensary have given you just enough knowledge to recognise and not nearly enough to fix. The dispensary has laudanum. Laudanum helps with the cramps, which are severe, which are the thing that the surviving patients describe later with the most visible horror. Cramping so intense it contorts the body, leaves the muscles shaking. The laudanum dulls this. It doesn't stop the process. Nothing in Mr. Crane's shop stops the process, because cholera in 1854 doesn't have a cure. There's no treatment that works, not in any meaningful sense. The body loses fluid at a catastrophic rate, and everything you can do is try to slow the loss and hope the body can survive long enough to fight back. Some bodies can, some bodies do. John Caro's body is not among them. You're back at the room on Broad Street at noon. Not because Mr. Crane sent you back, he needs you at the shop. You went back because you needed to check, because Eliza's face when you left that morning is still with you, and you've been carrying it through the courts all morning like something in your pocket that you keep touching without meaning to. The doctor has been and gone. This is what Eliza tells you, standing in the doorway of the downstairs room, speaking quietly so her mother, inside, doesn't have to hear it again. The doctor came, assessed the situation, administered something from his bag that he described as restorative, but that didn't restore anything, wrote something in his notebook, and left. He said it was the miasma. He said the smell from the court was to blame. He said they should burn vinegar and keep the windows shut, which is, as it turns out, almost perfectly backwards from what they should actually be doing. But this is 1854, and miasma theory is what everyone believes, and the doctor is a kind man doing his best with what he's been taught. Mr. Caro died at 11:15. He was 53 years old. He had made book bindings for some of the finest print houses in London. He made a joke about the weather every single morning. He used the pump on his street because the water tasted clean, and he'd been using it for years, and there had never been any reason to think there was anything wrong with it. You stand in the hallway and listen to the sounds of the room. Eliza's mother is crying, not loudly. The restrained way of someone trying not to. The sound of breath catching on itself at intervals. Eliza is very still, leaning against the doorframe, looking at nothing in particular, just past your left shoulder. "Are you well yourself?" you ask. "You and your mother?" "So far," she says. Her voice is steady, but the word itself, so far, is doing a lot of work. The specific uncertainty of those 2 words. "We had the pump water this morning, same as every morning." You say nothing. You think about what Mr. Crane said. The patterns, the clusters, always around the water sources. "Eliza," you say, "don't use the pump." She looks at you. I don't know that it's the pump, you say, because it's 1854 and you're 18 and Mr. Crane is the one with the hypothesis, not you. But don't use it. Get water from the New River Company pipe on Poland Street, or send to the brewery for small beer if you have to. Just don't use the pump. Not until we know more. She looks at you for a moment. Something shifts in her expression. The steadiness is still there, but something underneath it has shifted, like a board that flexes slightly when you step on it. All right, she says. She goes back inside. You stand in the hallway for another moment, listening to the sounds of the street through the front door. Carts, voices, the sound of the pump handle being worked, a rhythmic squeaking and flow of water, someone filling their morning bucket. The pump is still running. By the afternoon of the 1st of September, everyone on Broad Street knows something is happening. Not cholera yet, not officially. The word moves through neighbourhoods like fire moves through dry wood. Quickly, but only in the right conditions when someone says it out loud first. Before then, what people have is a collection of anxieties that are circling around a name they haven't used yet. What people say in the afternoon of September the 1st is that Mrs. Pierce is dead and she was perfectly healthy last week, that the Susanna Court people are all sick, multiple families, the whole court is ill, that 3 children from the workhouse on Poland Street died overnight, which is terrible but not unprecedented in a workhouse. Honestly, that's the thing. That's what makes it hard to say the word out loud, because children die in workhouses and nobody calls it a catastrophe. What people also say is, it's the smell. It's coming from the brewery or the tannery or the cesspit on the corner that hasn't been emptied since spring. It's the heat. It's the fact that the summer has been so dry the organic matter in the streets is concentrated. It's miasma, bad air. The pump, at this point in the afternoon of September the 1st, is still in full use. You're at the counter of Crane's shop when the next wave begins. You say wave, and that's the right word, because it arrives with the quality of a wave, a certain gathering before it hits, a feeling of pressure building, and then all at once you're in the middle of it and the water is over your head. 4 people through the door inside 20 minutes. A woman carrying her daughter, maybe 7 years old, shaking uncontrollably. A man from the court on the south side of Broad Street, very pale, very frightened, very polite about his fear, in the specific way of working-class men who've been taught that showing fear is weakness. An older woman, quite composed, who informs Mr. Crane matter-of-factly that her husband is dead in their rooms, and can anyone help her move him. A boy who comes in alone, maybe 12, whose instructions from whoever sent him have become garbled with the fear and the urgency, and he stands at the counter saying, "Medicine, please, for my mother, she needs," until Mr. Crane gently asks him his name and his address and what exactly is wrong with his mother, and the boy starts to cry. You give the boy water from the jug behind the counter, not pump water. Mr. Crane brought in water from a different source this morning, a standpipe on Regent Street, carried in 2 large stoneware jugs with stoppers. He did this without explanation before you arrived, and you understand it now as the act of a man who's been right about something for long enough to take precautions quietly without waiting for permission. The boy drinks the water, calms slightly, tells Mr. Crane his mother's symptoms. Mr. Crane measures something, writes something on a paper for the boy, gives him a small bottle, tells him exactly when and how to administer it, and sends him out. Then he turns to you and says, "We're going to need more camphor. Go to Piper's on Brewer Street, tell them Mr. Crane sent you, and get as much as they can spare. Brewer Street is 3 minutes away on a normal day. Today it takes you 12 minutes, because Broad Street itself has changed between this morning and this afternoon. It hasn't changed in the way you'd notice at a glance. The same buildings, the same cobblestones, which are hot under the soles of your boots in the afternoon heat, radiating back up through the leather. The same court entries, the same pump, the same trough, the same cast iron handle. But the people are different. There's a quality to a street that's afraid. You notice it now for the first time standing at the corner of Broad Street and Poland Street, looking down the length of the road. People are moving differently, faster and in a particular direction, away. Women with baskets walking quickly toward Regent Street, the baskets heavier than usual, the possessions you grab if you might not be coming back kind of heavy. A man locking his front door, testing the lock twice, looking up and down the street, then heading north. A family, father, mother, 2 children, a bundle between them, coming out of one of the courts and just walking purposefully, without the normal look people with somewhere specific to be. The leaving has started. By the end of the week, this street will have lost nearly 3/4 of its inhabitants, not dead, fled. People who packed what they could carry and got out while they still could, which is the rational response to a disease outbreak of this severity, except that it also seeds the disease further into the surrounding neighbourhoods, because some of them are already sick when they leave and don't know it yet. But right now, in this afternoon, it's just beginning. The slow hemorrhage of a community that's beginning to understand that something is very wrong. You stand at the corner for a moment, feeling the heat of the cobblestones through your boots and the heat of the sun on the back of your neck and the smell of the street. That smell, the one you woke to this morning, which has deepened and thickened in the hours since dawn into something that is now unmistakably, specifically, the smell of an epidemic, even if you don't have the word for it yet. Then you go and get the camphor. Mr. Piper at the chemist's on Brewer Street is a large, red-faced man who sweats visibly in all weathers and doesn't apologise for it. He knows Mr. Crane, respects him in the slightly sideways way that men in the same profession respect each other, and when you arrive with your message, he fills your order without questions and then adds a question of his own. How bad is it down there? Getting worse, you say. 5 dead that I know of since last night. More coming in ill. Mr. Piper exhales slowly through his nose, taps his counter. Cholera? Mr. Crane thinks so. Crane thinks everything is cholera. But he says this without conviction. What else is he saying? You hesitate. Mr. Crane is precise about what he says and to whom, and the water hypothesis feels like something he wouldn't want broadcast from a chemist's counter on Brewer Street. But Mr. Piper is watching you with the sharp eyes of a man who already suspects something and is waiting for someone else to confirm it. He has some ideas about the source, you say carefully. Mr. Piper nods once. The pump, he says. You say nothing. Half my customers live on that street, he says more quietly. I've been hearing about it all morning. People coming in who drank from the pump yesterday. People who are already showing. He stops himself, wraps your parcel, pushes it across the counter. Tell Crane I'll credit him. Pay me when this is over. He says, when this is over, in a tone that makes it clear he's not entirely certain it will be. The night of September 1st. You eat supper standing up at the back of the dispensary, a piece of bread and some cold beef that Mrs. Crane sent down from the house above with a firmness that brooked no argument, because Mr. Crane had indicated he intended to miss supper entirely, and Mrs. Crane's response to her husband's self-neglect has, over approximately 30 years of marriage, taken the form of sandwiches appearing silently and unavoidably in his vicinity. Samuel doesn't come home. You wait until 8:30, then go up to the room alone. The street below is quieter than usual for this time of night. Not quiet, Broad Street is never quiet, but the particular evening noise is different. The usual pub and tavern noise from the corner of Wardour Street is there, but underneath it there's a quality of absence. That's what it is. The absence of the normal low hum of people sitting in their doorways in the evening, the domestic sound of a dense neighbourhood at ease. Nobody is sitting in their doorways tonight. The doors are mostly shut, the windows lit from within, curtains drawn. People inside, behind their doors with their curtains drawn, hoping that whatever is in the air outside will stay outside. You wash your face and hands with water from the Regent Street jug. Mr. Crane's precaution has become your precaution now, and you find yourself standing over the small basin with the clean water, washing your hands for longer than strictly necessary, working the water between your fingers and under your nails, because there is something in the work you've done today. The cloths, the basins, the proximity to people who are already ill, that feels like it has gotten onto you somehow, into you somehow, and the washing feels like the only tool you have. It is, as it turns out, not the most useless tool. The cholera bacterium, Vibrio cholera, is transmitted through ingestion of contaminated water. It is not transmitted through skin contact the way you fear it might be. But you don't know this. Nobody on this street knows this. The entire conceptual framework for understanding how disease moves through a community is, in 1854, comprehensively wrong. What you have, instead of knowledge, is fear, and the practical sense to do the only thing that feels like it might help. You wash your hands, you lie down on the cot, you listen to the street. Somewhere below, Mrs. Carrow is spending her first night in a house with her husband's body in it, waiting for the parish officer to come in the morning and take him away. Eliza is sitting up with her, probably, or lying awake in the dark, in the specific kind of awake that comes after shock, when your body is too tired to be anything but awake. You lie on your back and listen to the sounds of Broad Street at night. The pump is still there. You can't hear it now, not at this hour, but you know it's there, standing in the middle of the street in the dark, cast iron, cold to the touch, full of whatever it's been full of for weeks, months, possibly longer. Patient in the way that inanimate objects are patient, which is to say completely and without any understanding of what it's doing. You fall asleep somewhere around 10. The last thing you're aware of is the smell. It's still there. September 2nd. You wake before the church bells. This is new. In 8 months on Broad Street, you have never woken before the church bells. The church bells are what wake you, the insistent morning clanging of St. Luke's and St. James's and All Souls and the half-dozen others within earshot, each with their own pitch and rhythm and degree of urgency. They're the sound of the city deciding it's time to be awake. Today, you're awake before any of them. The street is not quiet. This is the first thing you register. It's not yet 5 in the morning, and the street is not quiet. You get up and go to the window. Below, in the thin grey light of a September pre-dawn, there are 3 carts on Broad Street that shouldn't be there yet. 2 are empty, their drivers standing beside them with an air of people waiting for something. The 3rd has... You look away from the 3rd cart. You know what it's carrying. You know from the shape under the cloth, and the smell, now that you're at the window, is very specific and very new, layered over the base smell of the epidemic with something else. Something you have no frame of reference for in your life up to this morning, but that you will never, in the rest of your life, confuse with anything else. Samuel comes in while you're still standing at the window. He spent the night somewhere else, with a friend from the leather dressers on Carnaby Street, far enough from Broad Street to feel safe, close enough to feel guilty about feeling safe. He comes in quietly, takes in the window and your face, and sits down on the edge of his cot. "How many?" he asks. "You've been trying to count the buildings with the curtains drawn at this particular early hour, the ones that have the quality of houses where something has happened. It's not a reliable method. It's the only method you have." "I don't know," you say. "A lot." Samuel is quiet for a moment. He's not ordinarily a quiet person. He has opinions about everything and shares them freely and sometimes at length, and you've spent most of the last 8 months in a state of mild exasperation at his tendency to narrate his own life. Right now, he's sitting on his cot in the grey morning light, very still, saying nothing. "I'm going back to Stoke," he says eventually. You don't respond immediately, you watch the street below. "You should too," he says. "You should write to your people and go home." Mr. Crane can find another boy. You're 18, not a servant. You can go. This is true, technically. You're an apprentice, which is different from a servant in that your indenture has specific terms, and Mr. Crane has legal obligations toward you, but you're not chained to the shop. You could go. You think about it. You genuinely think about it. Standing at the window with the pre-dawn grey on your face and the smell of the epidemic in your nose, the carts below, the sound that you've already decided you're not going to try to describe in your letter home. You think about Bishopstone, the fields, the specific quality of the air there, which you've never particularly appreciated until this moment, your mother's kitchen. Then you think about Mr. Crane, who arrived at the shop at 6:30 every morning for 30 years, who measures everything twice, who is currently across the street in his house, sleeping for 4 hours before going back to work, who said to you yesterday, very simply and without drama, "Today will be difficult." "I'll see what he says," you tell Samuel. Samuel shrugs. The shrug of someone who has already made his decision and respect that you might make a different one, but considers yours probably ill-advised. He starts packing his bag. Mr. Crane doesn't ask you to stay. This is important. He doesn't ask. When you arrive at the shop at 6:15 and tell him that Samuel has left and that you've been thinking about your options, he listens, finishes what he's writing in his ledger, and looks up at you. "You're not obligated to be here," he says. "The terms of your apprenticeship don't require you to put yourself at risk. Nobody could fault you for going." A pause. He uncaps his pen again. "I intend to stay," he says. "There will be people who need what I can provide. I won't be much good to them if I leave." He starts writing again. The question of whether you will stay or go is somehow answered by this, though he hasn't asked you anything. You've been in this shop for 8 months. You've watched Mr. Crane work with the same precision and the same lack of sentiment in small moments and large ones, measuring a remedy for a child's cough and measuring a remedy for a woman in the last stages of something that won't be named, with exactly the same care, the same exactness. You take off your coat, hang it on the hook behind the counter, put on your shop apron. "Tell me what you need," you say. Here is what cholera does to a body. I'm telling you this not to be unpleasant, but because understanding what the people on Broad Street were experiencing requires understanding the mechanism, and the mechanism is genuinely one of the most efficient and terrible things that has ever evolved. The cholera bacterium produces a toxin. That toxin interferes with the cells lining the intestine, specifically their ability to regulate the movement of water. The cells stop functioning as a barrier and start essentially pumping water out of the body into the intestinal tract. The body, responding as it's designed to, tries to expel this fluid, which it does, rapidly, continuously. The patient loses litres of fluid in hours. The blood thickens, the tissues desiccate. The muscles, starved of the electrolytes carried by that fluid, begin to cramp with a severity that survivors consistently describe as the most intense pain of their lives. In the acute phase, without treatment, a healthy adult can die within hours of first showing symptoms. In 1854, the treatment available in a dispensary on Broad Street consists of laudanum for the pain, brandy for the shock, saline solutions of limited formulation that are better than nothing and worse than what we now know would work, and the nurse's fundamental tools: warmth, fluids, the application of firm and consistent human presence in a situation that tends to terrify the person experiencing it. You administer all of these things over the course of September 2nd. Your hands become familiar with the weight of a water jug at a particular angle, the exact pressure needed to tip it to a person's lips without spilling, the resistance of stiffened fingers that are too cramped to hold a cup. You learn how to get the laudanum into someone who's in too much pain to swallow deliberately, a particular tilting technique that Mr. Crane shows you without comment, efficiently, the way he shows you everything. You learn what a person looks like before they stabilize and what a person looks like before they don't. This knowledge sits in your body now, in your hands and your eyes, and you carry it with you through the rest of your life. The physical memory of these two categories, the weight of the distinction between them. Here is who you meet on September 2nd. Not everyone. You can't track everyone. The street is moving too fast now, the days compressing, the hours acquiring a quality of unreality that you'll try to explain to your mother in a letter 3 weeks later and find you can't. Quite. But certain people stick. A woman named Martha Cooper, who lives in one of the courts off Berwick Street, and whose husband sent her to get water from the Broad Street pump 3 days ago, because it was closer than the Poland Street pipe and she was already tired from a long morning. Martha is 31, 4 children, a quick-minded woman with a dry way of speaking even in extremity. She's been ill since yesterday morning. Her husband brought her to Crane's after the parish doctor didn't come. She's bad, but she's fighting. You can see it in the way she responds when you speak to her, the specific quality of attention she manages even through the pain. Her eyes tracking to your face with an alertness that means something. Her husband is a tallow chandler, big-handed, quieter than she is, holding her hand with a care that makes the care visible. She survives. Martha Cooper survives. You learn this much later, when the letters start coming and Mr. Crane compiles his records, and you find her name on the list of cases with the notation, recovered September 8th, and something in you, something you didn't know was braced, eases slightly. An old man named Robert Doyle, who has lived in the same room in the same house on Broad Street for 39 years, who can remember when this neighbourhood was considered quite genteel. Who tells you this while you sit with him on the afternoon of the 2nd, speaking between the intervals of the cramps with the measured conserving energy manner of a man who is not certain how much energy he has left and wants to use it wisely. He talks about the street, about what it used to be. He makes observations about the way the neighbourhood has changed, the overcrowding, the deteriorating quality of the housing stock, the privies that share walls with the water sources, with the particular clarity of someone who has watched a long, slow decline from close range. The pump's in a bad way, he says, at one point. Just that, as if commenting on a structural problem. What makes you say that, you ask? He considers. His face has the grey-blue cast that you've learned in 24 hours to watch for. But his eyes are still sharp. The smell, he says. Not today. Before. Last week. The water tastes the same, but there was a smell around the pump itself that wasn't right. Like something coming up from below. He closes his eyes. Should have said something, he says. He dies at approximately 4 a.m. of September 3rd. He is 71 years old. He knew something was wrong with the pump and didn't say anything because who do you tell? Who would listen? The parish vestry, the board of works, an old man in a room on Broad Street saying the pump smells wrong. Nobody would have listened. As it turns out, even the man with the map and the data has trouble getting people to listen. But that's coming. A doctor arrives on the afternoon of the 2nd. Not the regular parish doctor who is overwhelmed and doing his best, but a different doctor. He comes from outside the neighbourhood, which you can tell immediately from the quality of his coat, which is good wool, and his boots, which are well made, and the fact that he walks into the dispensary and looks around with the focused attention of someone who is here to observe and understand rather than simply to react. He's perhaps in his early 40s, not tall, brown hair going slightly grey, the kind of face that is unremarkable until it turns towards something it's interested in, at which point it becomes quite distinctive, because the interest is so complete and so specific that it changes the whole quality of his attention. He introduces himself to Mr. Crane. You're at the back of the shop compounding something, but you catch the name, Dr. John Snow. Mr. Crane straightens, just slightly. The particular straightening of a man whose hypothesis has just walked through the door. I've been following your articles, Mr. Crane says, instead of hello, and I've been told you have the most complete records of cases in this immediate area, Dr. Snow says. Is that true? As complete as I could make them given the resources available. May I see them? Mr. Crane takes out a ledger and puts it on the counter. Dr. Snow opens it, reads for a moment in the way that people who read quickly read, the eyes moving fast and not stopping to demonstrate that they've understood, and then he looks up. The clustering pattern, he says, not a question. All within 200 to 300 yards of the pump, Mr. Crane says. I've been to 37 houses this morning, Dr. Snow says. 32 of them report regular use of the Broad Street pump. 4 report exclusive use of a different source. 1 is equivocal. He pauses. I need to speak to the Board of Guardians. They won't remove the pump handle on the evidence of 1 physician. No, Dr. Snow agrees. That's why I need more evidence. He looks at you, actually looks at you for the first time, the focused attention turning in your direction. You're the apprentice? Yes, sir. How many cases have you attended personally in the last 24 hours, you think? You count. 11 that I attended directly. Perhaps 20 I have second-hand information on. Can you identify which houses? You find a piece of paper and write down the addresses. You're precise about it, the way Mr. Crane taught you, no approximations, Only what you know for certain? Dr. Snow reads the list, and you watch him doing something in his head, something spatial, mapping the addresses against a geography that he's carrying internally. The pump, he says quietly, to the paper more than to either of you. Yes, Mr. Crane says. Dr. Snow folds the paper and tucks it into his coat. He says something to Mr. Crane about returning in the morning. He looks at you once more, briefly, with the particular look of a man filing away information. Then he goes back out to Broad Street. You watch him through the shop window. He stands on the street for a moment looking at the pump with the expression of someone confirming something. Then he turns and walks in the direction of Cambridge Street, where a woman told you earlier that she'd seen a doctor knocking on doors, asking questions about water. September 3rd begins before you're ready for it. There's no easing in, no gradual assembly of sound and light the way mornings usually work, the city accumulating itself piece by piece from silence into noise. September 3rd arrives all at once, at approximately 4:30 in the morning, with the sound of someone hammering on the front door of the building below, and a voice calling up from the street with a name that isn't yours. You lie still for a moment, confirming that the hammering is real, that you're awake, that the thin grey light coming through the window is the first suggestion of dawn, and not just your eyes adjusting. Then you get up. The room is cold. The nights have turned now, the way they do in early September in London, suddenly and without apology. The summer warmth that was pressing in through the windows a week ago replaced overnight with something that has the quality of autumn already. The particular indoor cold that comes not from the outside air but from the walls themselves. The old stone and plaster and lath that have absorbed the cold from the outside and are now releasing it inward, slow and even and impartial. Your boots are where you left them. Your coat. You move quietly because there's no roommate to be quiet for any more. Samuel left yesterday morning with his bag and a nod, heading north, heading to the railway, heading to Stoke-on-Trent, and the specific reassurance of distance. But the habit of moving quietly in a shared space is in your body, and you do it anyway. You go to the window first, Broad Street below in the pre-dawn. The hammering has stopped. Whoever was at the door got an answer, or gave up, or wasn't at this building at all. The street is not empty. This is the thing, the continuing strangeness of this week. Broad Street is never empty, even now, even in the worst of it, even with the exodus of the last 2 days steadily thinning the population. There are people moving in the early light. Some of them are leaving, still leaving, the slow stream of departure that has been running continuously since the 1st of September. Families and single people and groups of lodgers from the same building, all moving in the same direction, away, with the quality of motion that is neither panicked nor leisurely, but the focused, efficient movement of people who have made a decision and are executing it. And some of them are going to the pump. You watch a woman with 2 buckets hanging from a wooden yoke make her way to the pump in the early light, set her buckets under the spout and work the handle. The familiar squeak and flow, the sound of water. She fills the first bucket, tilts the yoke to fill the second, lifts the whole weight onto her shoulders with the practiced ease of 10,000 repetitions, and walks back toward whatever court she came from. She doesn't know. She still doesn't know. You want to call down from the window. You genuinely consider it, standing there with your hands on the windowsill and the cold of the glass under your palms, the woman with the buckets already turning the corner into one of the courts. But you're 18. You're a dispensary boy. The woman with the buckets has been managing her own household's water supply since before you were born, and she's never had any reason to believe the pump was dangerous, and one voice from an upstairs window at 4:30 in the morning telling her not to use the water she just filled is not going to be received as information. It's going to be received as noise. You need authority. You need someone the parish will listen to. You need someone to take the handle off the pump. The 3rd of September is the worst day. I'm not saying this to prepare you for something that doesn't come. I'm saying it because it's true, and the truth of it is important for understanding everything that happens after. Because the worst day is also the day when things begin to change, when the shape of what's happening starts to become visible to the people who have the power to act on it. The worst days are often like that. The clearest moments. The ones where the thing you've been trying to understand finally shows you what it is. By noon on the 3rd, Broad Street has lost, by the count that Dr. Snow will later publish, the count that Mr. Crane has been keeping in his ledger, the count that the parish clerks will compile from death certificates in the weeks after. 127 people dead in 2 days, in 1/4 mile of London. The scale of this requires sitting with for a moment, the way large numbers require sitting with, because the individual cases, John Carrow with his weather jokes, old Robert Doyle with his 39 years on the street, Martha Cooper fighting, those are graspable. A person, a death, the weight of a specific absence in a specific household. 127 is not graspable in the same way. 127 is the number that makes it history, but you're not living in history on the 3rd of September. You're living on Broad Street, in a dispensary that smells of camphor and spirits of ammonia, and the particular sharpness of fear sweat from the people who come through the door all morning, and the scale of what's happening is not a number to you. It's the length of the line outside the shop when you arrive at 6:15. It's the speed at which Mr. Crane works through the morning, methodical but faster than his usual rhythm, the rhythm of a man managing a very large number of things simultaneously without losing precision on any of them. It's the quality of the street outside which has crossed a threshold overnight from frightening to something else. There's a particular silence that settles over a place that has absorbed a certain quantity of grief. Not quiet. Broad Street is still making noise. The noise continues. The city doesn't stop for anything. But a silence inside the noise. A quality of subdued. People speaking more quietly. Moving with more care. The normal daily performances of urban life. The greeting, the negotiation, the small assertion of public self that every city person does automatically, continuously, as a form of social maintenance, all of these have contracted. People are not performing today. They're just moving through. You run errands. You carry things. You sit with people when Mr. Crane sends you to sit with them, and sit with people when he doesn't. When you're passing a house where someone asked you this morning if you'd come back, when you have 20 minutes between whatever is immediately needed and whatever is coming next. Your boots are developing blisters. There's a place on your right heel where the leather has rubbed through the stocking. You're aware of it the way you're aware of hunger, as a background fact, real but not currently actionable, something to be attended to later when later becomes available. Your hands are dry. The washing, the constant careful washing that you've adopted as your primary method of managing terror, has chapped them along the knuckles. In the morning chill, the skin pulls tight against the bone and splits slightly at the joints. The thin red lines of winter hands that you've developed in late September, early October in previous years, but never in late summer. These are the details you remember later, not always the large ones. The specific texture of the apron string where you've tied it too tight again. The sound the laudanum bottle makes when it's nearly empty, and you tip it and just a few drops come out. The weight of a person's hand in yours when you hold it. The specific combination of cold skin and too fast pulse. The particular grip of someone who is frightened and trying not to show it because they have been told to be brave. But the grip says something different. Dr. Snow comes back at 2 in the afternoon. He has a map, not the final version. That comes later, the famous one. The one that will be reproduced in medical textbooks for the next 170 years. The one that shows every case in the neighbourhood plotted as a small black bar, and the bars clustering, thickening, piling up around one central point the way iron filings cluster around a magnet. That map takes time, takes the systematic door-to-door interviews that he's been conducting since the 1st of September, takes the spatial patience to plot each case precisely against the street grid of Soho. What he has today is a working version. A large sheet of paper with the streets drawn in careful ink and marks on it that he's been adding as he goes, and the marks are already telling the story clearly enough that when he spreads it on Mr. Crane's counter and you lean over it, you don't need anyone to explain it to you. The marks are heaviest on Broad Street. They're dense on the courts immediately adjacent. They thin out as you move away from the pump, not linearly, not in a perfect circle, but with the irregular logic of daily human movement, where some people go further for their water and some people don't, where some households sent a specific person to a specific source, and some households didn't, and there are notable absences. The brewery, Dr. Snow says, pointing. His finger moves to the large building at the end of Broad Street. 70 workers, roughly. I've spoken to the manager. Not a single case among the workers. Mr. Crane nods slowly. They have their own well, Dr. Snow continues, and the workers are given small beer as part of their wages. He pauses. They don't drink from the street pump. The workhouse, Mr. Crane says, pointing to his own notation on the ledger. Poland Street. 350 inmates. 5 deaths. Disproportionately low for the density and the proximity, Dr. Snow says. The workhouse has its own supply from the Grand Junction Company. The inmates don't use the street pump. He looks up from the map. His expression is the expression of a man who's been building a case for 4 years and is watching it become irrefutable. There's no triumph in it, just a kind of careful, exhausted satisfaction. Every exception proves the rule. You look at the map, you look at the marks, the thickening cluster around the pump. What do you need? You ask. Both men look at you. You're aware, in a way that you weren't when you asked, that you've stepped slightly out of the expected behaviour for an apprentice, which is to be present and useful and quiet. But the question came out, and it's the right question, and neither of them tells you to be quiet. I need the Board of Guardians to remove the pump handle, Dr. Snow says. I have an appointment with them this evening. He looks at Mr. Crane. Will you come? Yes, Mr. Crane says without hesitation, and your records. It's not a question. Your case records will be the most complete available. If you can bring them, I'll bring everything. Mr. Crane picks up his pen, returns to his ledger, opens to a fresh page and begins, in his precise and unhesitating hand, to write a summary of what his records show. Evidence. Organised evidence. You watch him for a moment. Then you go back to work. Outside, through the afternoon, the street continues. The carts are back. The parish officers. The people whose specific role in an epidemic is to deal with the physical aftermath, a role that requires a particular kind of steadiness, which some of them have, and some of them manage with the help of the jinn they're not quite hiding, and some of them manage imperfectly in ways you avert your eyes from. The smell has changed again. It's deeper now, more complex. In the houses where the illness has been longest, there's a layer underneath the sickness. Smell that is something else. The smell of rooms where the air hasn't moved in days, where the windows have been kept shut because of the miasma theory, where grief and fear have been accumulating alongside everything else. You deliver a bottle of laudanum to a household on the court off Berwick Street that you haven't been to before. The woman who meets you at the door is perhaps 50, wearing black, which tells you something about the speed at which this street has moved through its stages of response. Already in black, already past whatever stage comes before formal mourning. She takes the bottle, looks at it, looks at you. Is it getting better? She asks. This is the question you've been asked 6 times today. You've been developing over the course of these days a position on this question, not a lie, but a careful selection from what you know, because what you know is it might be about to get better. There is someone working on a reason why it might get better, but you can't say this because you don't know if tonight's meeting will change anything, and you can't hand someone hope that might not materialise. The doctor is working on it, you say. Come to the dispensary on Silver Street if you need anything more. She nods, closes the door. You stand in the court for a moment. The court is narrow, maybe 8 feet wide between the facing buildings. The buildings on both sides are 4 stories, the upper stories leaning very slightly toward each other in the way of old buildings in dense urban areas, as if they're reaching for contact or support. The sky above the court is a strip of grey, September afternoon, very bright against the dark buildings, like a seam of light in something otherwise closed. There's a child sitting on the step of the building opposite, maybe 5 years old, a girl in a grey dress that was probably white at one point, sitting with her knees together and her hands folded in her lap with the unnaturally composed stillness of a child who's been told not to move and has taken this instruction very seriously. She's watching you with the direct and uncategorized attention of a small child. No social performance, just observation. "Hello," you say. "Hello," she says. "Are you all right?" "Mum said stay here," she says, by way of answer. Then, "Are you the medicine man?" "Something like that," you say. She considers this. "My da is sick," she says, not tragically in the reporting tone. "And my nan. Mum said they'll get better." "I hope so," you say. The words feel inadequate. They are inadequate. But they're the ones you have. She nods, apparently satisfied with this, and goes back to her careful stillness on the step. You walk back to the dispensary. Mr. Crane leaves at 6 o'clock. He puts on his better coat. Takes his ledger and the summary he wrote this afternoon folded into the inside pocket. Checks that everything in the shop is in order. The coals banked. The compound stored properly. The door locked. With the same attention to detail that he brings to everything. The same care regardless of the scale of the surrounding circumstance. Don't open the door after dark, he tells you. If someone is in crisis, they can knock on the back window, and I'll hear it when I return. Where is the meeting? The vestry hall, Broadwick Street. He buttons his coat. If I'm not back by 9, go to bed. You'll need the sleep. He goes out. You lock the door after him and stand in the shop for a moment, in the particular silence of a space that has been full of activity all day and is now empty. The smell of camphor and coal smoke, the rows of jars on the shelves, the amber and green and clear of various solutions and tinctures and preparations, all labelled in Mr. Crane's precise handwriting, the counter worn smooth at the edge where people's hands rest while they wait. The ledger is gone with Mr. Crane, but you have your own memory of what's in it. The names, the addresses, the notations. You make yourself tea on the back stove, which is a small luxury that Mr. Crane permits you, and that you've never appreciated quite as much as you do right now. The heat of the cup, the smell of the tea, ordinary and domestic, cutting through the chemical smell of the shop. You drink it standing at the back window, looking out at the narrow yard behind the building. It's fully dark now. The yard is lit by the same thin lamp that hangs at the back every night, casting about 3 feet of useful light, and leaving everything beyond that in a darkness that the eye keeps trying to resolve into shapes. A cat moves through the edge of the light, stops, regards you through the window with the serene indifference of cats, and continues. Broad Street at the back sounds like this. A low murmur of movement and occasional voices, the sound of wheels on cobblestones, the sound of a door opening and closing, someone calling a name. Far off, the regular note of a watchman. And underneath all of it, just present enough to be there, not present enough to be identified if you weren't already listening for it. The pump. Not the sound of it being used, just the sound of the street around it, the specific quality of the space it occupies. Tomorrow, if tonight goes the way it needs to go, that handle will be off the pump. You finish your tea, put the cup down, go back to work. There are things to do in a dispensary in the evening that aren't crises. This is something you've learned from Mr. Crane, who is precise about the distinction between the work that requires urgency and the work that requires attention, and who does not permit one category to eat the other. Even in the worst weeks, the jars still need to be restocked. The orders still need to be written. The ledger still needs to be updated. These things are also true tonight, even on September 3rd, even with the street doing what it's doing outside. You restock the laudanum, you write the supply order for tomorrow, noting the camphor running low again, and the bismuth and the carbonate of magnesia and the saline compound that Mr. Crane has been giving to the cases with the best chance of keeping fluids down. You update the case log with the names and addresses from today's visits, writing carefully in your best approximation of Mr. Crane's precision, knowing that these notes may matter later, and while you work, you think. You think about Dr. Snow's map, about the way the marks clustered around the pump, about the brewery workers who drank their own well water and stayed healthy, about old Robert Doyle, who smelled something wrong at the pump last week and didn't know who to tell. You've spent your whole life accepting explanations given to you by people who should know. Your schoolmaster, Lord Pemberton's estate manager, the vicar, Mr. Crane, who does know and whose explanations you've found to be reliable. But there's a difference between accepting a reliable explanation and understanding the evidence that makes it reliable. And tonight, alone in the shop with the supply order and the case log and the memory of Dr. Snow spreading his map on this counter this afternoon, you feel the difference clearly. The map showed something. The map showed it as clearly as a line of text on a page. The sickness is where the pump water goes. The sickness is not where the pump water doesn't go. The evidence is right there, in the spatial logic, in the exceptions as much as in the cases. And for 4 years, nobody with the authority to act has been willing to accept it, because the theory they already have, the miasma theory, the bad air theory, tells them something different. The bad air theory is comfortable. It fits the experience of walking through Soho on a summer afternoon. It feels true. You can smell the bad air. You can feel it, thick and hot and wrong. The way that organic decay in confined spaces feels physically present. The evidence of your senses confirms the theory, except the evidence of the map doesn't. This, you think, is what science actually is, not the comfortable agreement between what you already believe and what you observe, the uncomfortable disagreement, the evidence that doesn't fit. The brewery workers who should be sick and aren't, the workhouse inmates who should be sicker and aren't, the exceptions that the theory can't explain, and the discipline to follow those exceptions rather than explain them away. You finish the supply order, blot the ink, file it in the correct place in the drawer under the counter. Then you do something you've been considering since this afternoon, since the map on the counter, since Dr. Snow's finger moving over the marks that cluster so clearly around that central point. You take a fresh sheet of paper, you draw Broad Street roughly from memory, you mark the courts, you mark the pump, and you start to write down every case you've attended personally over the last 3 days, with the address, and where you know it, whether the household used the pump regularly. It's not Dr. Snow's map. It's not even close to Dr. Snow's map. You don't have his data, his systematic interviews, his 4 years of developing this hypothesis. You have 48 hours of running errands and sitting with sick people and listening to what they say. But the pattern is there. Even on your rough sheet, with your imprecise memory and your approximate street drawing, the pattern is there. You stare at it for a while. The coal in the stove shifts and settles. The lamp flickers in a draught from the back window. The pump, you think. It's always been the pump. Mr. Crane comes back at 9:30. You hear his key in the lock and look up from the supply order you've been reviewing for the 3rd time, more out of something to do with your hands than because it needs reviewing. He comes in, takes off his coat, hangs it with his usual precision, looks at you. They agreed, he says. 2 words. They agreed to remove the handle, he says, in case the first 2 words needed clarification. You feel something in your chest that it takes you a moment to identify. Not relief exactly. Relief would require a certainty that this is over, and you have no such certainty. More like the sensation of a very tightly held thing beginning, just beginning, to loosen. Tomorrow morning, Mr. Crane continues, he goes to the back and starts making tea with the same efficiency he does everything. The parish officer will remove the handle from the pump at first light. It will remain off until the water is tested. A pause. The sound of the kettle. Dr. Snow presented his evidence clearly. The clustering pattern, the exceptions, the brewery, the workhouse, were sufficient to persuade a majority of the board. Did they accept the theory about the water? No, Mr. Crane says, without particular frustration. They accepted that something is wrong with the pump. The mechanism, whether it's the water itself or some emanation from the water, they're not convinced. But they agree to remove the handle regardless. He comes out with 2 cups of tea, sets one in front of you. Sometimes the practical result precedes the theoretical understanding. That's not how it should work, but it's how it frequently does. You think about this. Is that enough? Just removing the handle? It may be too late to stop the majority of cases that are already in progress. The incubation period means people who drank from the pump yesterday, today, may not yet be showing symptoms. He sits down. drinks his tea. But it stops the new cases. It stops the daily replenishment of the source. He looks at you. The epidemic may be slowing already, not because of tonight's decision, but because most of the people who are going to use the pump have either left the neighbourhood or are already ill. The pump is running out of a willing population. This is the cold calculus of epidemiology, stated without cruelty but without softening either. It's still the right thing, you say, not challenging him, stating it for yourself. Yes, Mr. Crane says, it is. You drink your tea. Outside, Broad Street is quiet in the way that streets go quiet after 10 on a weeknight. The particular urban quiet that isn't silence but has the texture of rest. Somewhere further away a horse, the sound of wheels, normal sounds. Go to bed, Mr. Crane says. Tomorrow will be a different kind of difficult. The morning of September 4th at approximately 7:30, you watch from the doorway of Crane's shop as a parish officer crosses Broad Street with a wrench and a slightly baffled expression, as if he's been asked to do something entirely reasonable that he's nonetheless finding philosophically difficult. He reaches the pump, crouches down, works the wrench at the base of the handle. The handle comes off. It takes about 30 seconds. The pump stands there, handleless, with a kind of structural bafflement that mirrors the expression on the parish officer's face. It looks, you think, like a word with a letter missing, like something that doesn't know what it is anymore. There are 3 people who came to use the pump this morning who are now standing on the pavement looking at the handle in the parish officer's hands. A woman with a bucket, a boy with a yoke, an older man who has the look of someone who walked some distance specifically for this water and is calculating the size of his inconvenience. The parish officer says something to them. You can't hear it from where you're standing. The woman with the bucket looks at the pump for a moment, then turns and walks away. The boy follows. The older man stands there a moment longer, then he too turns and goes. The pump stands in the middle of Broad Street with no handle. You stand in the doorway of Crane's shop looking at it. You feel... The feeling is difficult to name. It's not triumph. It doesn't have the clean, bright quality of triumph. It has more layers than that. There's relief, yes, but a relief that knows it's partial and late. There's the specific tiredness of the last 3 days, the kind that sits in your legs and your hands and the backs of your eyes. There's grief, which has been accumulating since the morning you woke to the sound from the room below and the smell through the floorboards, and which hasn't had anywhere to go yet because there hasn't been time, and which is still waiting, patient, for the time. And there's something else. Something you'll spend the next several weeks trying to put into words in letters home, in conversations with Mr. Crane, in the long evenings that come later when the worst is over and the neighbourhood is quiet and you can sit with what happened without the urgency pressing in from all sides. Something like the feeling of having been present for a thing that matters. Not the doctor who did the work, not the man with the hypothesis and the map, not even Mr. Crane with his ledger and his 30 years of precise observation. Just present, here, watching the handle come off the pump. That being present for the thing that matters is itself a kind of action, even when you're young and junior and largely running errands. That the people who run errands in a crisis are part of the crisis too. That what you've been doing for 3 days, the hand-holding, the laudanum, the careful washing, the delivery of camphor from pipers on Brewer Street, the list of addresses on a sheet of paper for Dr. Snow, that all of this is part of the same thing as the map and the meeting with the Board of Guardians. that the small acts are not separate from the large ones. They're the substrate the large ones grow from. You stand in the doorway for another moment. Then Mr. Crane's voice from inside. When you're ready. You go back in. The days after the handle comes off are a different kind of work. The epidemic doesn't end immediately. As Mr. Crane said, the people already infected continue to be ill, and some of them continue to die, and the work of the dispensary continues through September, the rhythm of it gradually easing, the line outside the door growing shorter each morning, the ledger's entries spacing further apart. But the shape of the crisis has changed. There's a particular moment, about a week after the handle comes off, when you're making the morning rounds, checking on the households that you've been visiting regularly, the ones where someone is recovering or someone is waiting for someone else to recover. And you realise that you haven't smelled that smell since yesterday. Not this morning. Not in any of the houses you've been into. You stop in the middle of a court off Berwick Street and stand very still for a moment, checking your own sensory memory, making sure you're not just missing it. No, it's not there. The morning smells of September in London, which is coal smoke and horse, and the first edge of autumn cold on the air. The ordinary smells, the baseline that you lived in for 8 months before this week, and that will be, you realise with a sudden and profound gratitude, the smell of the ordinary days that come after. You don't say anything to anyone. There's no one to say it to. The court is empty except for a cat sitting on a windowsill living its entirely parallel life. But you stand there for a moment in the ordinary smelling morning and you breathe. Dr. Snow comes back to the dispensary twice more in the weeks after. The second time he stays for nearly an hour, going through Mr. Crane's ledger with the methodical care that you've come to recognise as his characteristic speed. Not fast, not slow, but precise, every detail examined and properly weighted before moving on. He's extending his map, adding cases, cross-referencing with Mr. Crane's records to catch the ones who came to the dispensary but didn't answer their door when he knocked. The third time, he brings a version of the finished map. He spreads it on the counter the same way he spread the working version, the same gesture, the paper unrolling to reveal the grid of streets and the marks on them. But this version is complete. The marks are dense around the pump. The pump is at the centre of a cluster that looks, from above, like something pressing outward from a central point, like the rings of impact when a stone hits water. It will be published, he tells Mr. Crane, in a monograph, with the full analysis. Mr. Crane looks at the map for a moment. And will the Board of Health accept it? Dr. Snow's expression does something complicated. Eventually, he says. This, as it turns out, is accurate. The miasma theory doesn't fall immediately. It falls slowly, over years, as more evidence accumulates, as other investigators build on what Dr. Snow established here on Broad Street in the first days of September 1854. The germ theory of disease, the theory that specific microorganisms cause specific diseases, that cholera is not caused by bad air but by a bacterium that travels in contaminated water. This theory wins eventually. But eventually is a long time when you're in the middle of it. You look at the map. You can see your roots on it if you know how to look. The houses you visited, the courts you ran through, the addresses you wrote on the sheet of paper and handed to Dr. Snow that afternoon, the ones he pointed to on his working map. What happens now, you ask? Dr. Snow looks at you with the specific attention again. The attention that means you're being considered as a source of information. What do you mean? To the street, to the neighbourhood. He's quiet for a moment. People come back, he says. They always come back. A few will stay away, but most will return when the epidemic passes. The housing situation will remain what it is. The cesspits will remain too close to the water sources until the sanitary reform forces change. There'll be another outbreak in the East End in a few years. He says this without satisfaction, just the flat recognition of someone who's looked at the data. But the knowledge exists now. It will spread. Slowly, but it will spread. He rolls up the map, tucks it under his arm. You have good observational instincts, he says to you directly, with the absence of preamble that apparently characterizes all his conversations. For what it's worth. He leaves. You stand at the counter for a moment. Then Mr. Crane, without looking up from his ledger, "Close the door, please." You close the door. October comes in wet and cold, and Broad Street begins gradually to refill. The people who fled start coming back. Not all of them. Some have found rooms elsewhere. Better rooms, cheaper rooms, rooms further from whatever they've decided they're afraid of. But most, the neighbourhood reconstitutes itself the way neighbourhoods do, which is to say imperfectly and with adjustments, some households intact and some transformed by absence. The Carrow household, just Mrs. Carrow and Eliza now. You see them on the stairs occasionally. Mrs. Carrow nods at you with a particular nod of someone who has acknowledged a kindness without being ready yet to put it into words. Eliza says good morning. Sometimes she says more than that. She is, as it turns out, sharp and dry and very specific in her observations of the world, which you noticed that first morning through the quality of her steadiness, the economy of her attention. She has her father's eye for the particular, his ability to note what's actually happening in front of him without imposing too much of what he expected to see. It's a good quality, a useful one. You don't press. The time for pressing isn't now. The pump handle is put back eventually. This is perhaps the most instructive thing about the whole business. The Board of Guardians, having agreed to remove the handle on the weight of Dr. Snow's evidence, puts it back approximately 6 weeks later, when the epidemic has clearly passed, on the grounds that the pump water has been tested and found satisfactory, and the local residents need the water, and the miasma theory still holds as far as the majority of official opinion is concerned, so there's no sound scientific reason to keep the handle off. They're wrong, of course. The pump water is satisfactory in early October because the epidemic is over and the bacterium has died off. The pump will be quietly abandoned in subsequent years as the water infrastructure of London improves, as the 1858 Great Stink finally forces the construction of Bazalgette sewers, as the slow machinery of public health reform creaks into motion. But in October 1854, the handle goes back on, and women with buckets fill them at the pump, and the water tastes clean and cold and of nothing in particular. You know what you know. Mr. Crane knows what he knows. Dr. Snow knows, with the confidence of someone who has spent 4 years building irrefutable evidence. So evidence shows, and the handle is back on the pump. This is how it works sometimes. The knowledge and the institutional response to the knowledge are not synchronized. They move at different speeds. The knowledge is here now, in the map, in the ledger, in the careful records that Mr. Crane will maintain for the rest of his working life, in the paper that Dr. Snow will publish, in the epidemiological methods that will influence a generation of investigators who come after. The institution will catch up. It always does, eventually. Eventually is a long time when you're in the middle of it. Let me tell you what Broad Street becomes. Not immediately, not in the months after the epidemic. But over time, in the longer arc that the street doesn't know it's tracing in September 1854, any more than you know the arc of your own life from the inside of a single week. The street is renamed Broadwick Street. It happens in 1936, partly to shed the associations of the epidemic, partly as part of a larger administrative reorganization of the Soho Street names. The houses are redeveloped. The courts are demolished, eventually. The Susanna Court, the tenements, the buildings that were never meant to hold the number of people they held. The neighbourhood changes, the way London neighbourhoods always change, the working class density giving way to other densities, other uses. The pump is rebuilt as a monument, a replica. There is today, at the corner of Broadwick Street and Lexington Street, a red granite pump with a golden handle marking the approximate location of the original next to a pub named after John Snow. On the pub's exterior there's a plaque. People stop to look at it. Medical students come on pilgrimages, which would have baffled everyone on Broad Street in 1854. The idea that this pump, this particular unremarkable iron pump, would become a landmark. But the pump made history, not by existing. 1,000 pumps existed in London in 1854, and they're all gone, forgotten. This one made history by being wrong at a specific moment, in a specific place where a man with a map and a methodology was paying attention. The small things again. The pump handle removed, the map, the ledger, the names written down carefully in a dispensary on Silver Street. History is made of these things, and now it's late. Not that September night, though. I'll take you back there in a moment. Now, tonight, wherever you are. The days you've been carrying are set down for a while. The particular weight of what you brought into this hour, the things left undone, the things said or not said, the ordinary accumulations of a modern life. All of that is still there. It doesn't go anywhere. It'll be there in the morning. But for now, the way it always is at this hour when the dark is complete, and the body has been at it long enough, the weight feels less immediate, less actionable. You're warm enough. You're here. That's enough for now. Back to Broad Street for the last time. It's late September now. The epidemic is over, the worst of it has passed, and what remains is the slower grief of aftermath, which has its own rhythms and its own requirements. Mr. Crane's dispensary is returning to its normal patterns. The supply order is back to its usual items. The line outside the door each morning is the ordinary line, the coughs and fevers and small ailments of a London autumn. Nothing that looks like what September looked like. You sit at the counter on a quiet Tuesday evening after closing, with the stove burning low and the street outside making its ordinary sounds, and you write the letter home. You've started it 6 times. This is the version you finish. You tell your mother you are well. You tell her about the epidemic briefly, with selected details because the unselected version would not let her sleep. You tell her about Mr. Crane, who stayed and why. You tell her about the map because the map feels important, and because it's the part that's easiest to explain without making her afraid. You tell her that you've decided to stay in London, which was perhaps obvious from the fact that you didn't leave when Samuel left, but which feels worth stating explicitly. You tell her you're learning things you didn't expect to learn. You don't tell her about John Carow, or old Robert Doyle, or the woman in the court in her new black dress. You carry those quietly in the place where the particular things go. They'll be there. They'll stay. You fold the letter, write the address, set it aside for the post in the morning. The stove ticks. The street outside does its last evening sounds. Somewhere down the road, The pump stands with its handle on, because the handle went back on, because the city isn't finished understanding what happened here yet, but the understanding is in the world now and it won't leave. The handle will come off, finally and permanently, in the fullness of the slow work of evidence accumulating. Not tomorrow, but it will come. You blow out the lamp, climb the stairs. The room is cold. Your cot is narrower than it was when Samuel was here too, which makes no physical sense, but spaces contract when they lose the other presence that defined them. You've grown accustomed to it again, the solitary narrowness, the single set of breathing sounds. You take off your boots, set them carefully, out of habit, where they won't be kicked in the dark. Your coat on the hook. Your hands, last thing, washed in the basin, the clean Regent Street water, the careful working between the fingers that has become as automatic as breathing. The chapped knuckles are starting to heal. The blisters from September 3rd have resolved into thick skin. Your body is adapting the way bodies adapt, incorporating the evidence. Moving on, you lie down. The ceiling of this room, which you have stared at through insomnia and cold and the various small difficulties of an apprentice's life, is very familiar now. The hairline crack that runs from the corner by the window toward the centre, which grew by approximately 1 inch over the summer. The water stain near the door that predates your arrival by years. Its edges slightly darker than the centre. The signature of a specific morning a long time ago when the gutter above overflowed. The sounds of Broad Street at night. Quieter now than they were in September. The night sounds of a street that is healing slowly, the way streets heal, by filling back up with the ordinary life that was always in them, the particular noise of people living close together in the dark city, the sounds that aren't loud and aren't silent but are present, continuous, the sound of the city not stopping. You close your eyes. Here is what you learned this week, in no particular order. You learned that the truth and the official recognition of the truth move at different speeds, and that the gap between them is not empty. It's full of people doing the actual work of looking, measuring, recording, staying when staying is difficult. You learned that evidence can be right and still not be believed, and that the response to this is not to stop gathering evidence, but to gather more, and to be precise, and to wait with the steadiness of someone who knows what the evidence shows. You learned that the small acts matter, the errand run, the cloth wrung out and reapplied, the address written on a piece of paper in your best hand, the hand held in the specific grip of someone frightened. None of these things show up in the official account. They're not in the monograph or the map or the letter to the General Board of Health, but they're in the ledger. They're in the memories of the people who received them. They're in you, in your hands, in your body's knowledge of this week. You learned that cities are machines for producing proximity, and that proximity is both the source of everything good about human life. The trade, the art, the density of exchange and idea and encounter, and the source of everything terrible about human cholera outbreaks in 1854. You can't have the one without the risk of the other. The question is only whether the city is governed well enough to manage the risk. In 1854 on Broad Street the answer was, not yet, but getting there. You learn that staying is a choice you make not once but continuously. Every morning when you put on your apron, every time something terrible happens and you're still there. You learned that an 18-year-old from Bishopstone, Wiltshire, with 2 years of above-average education and 8 months in a dispensary, can be useful in a crisis if he pays attention and does exactly what's needed and doesn't get in the way of the people who know more than he does. This is, as it turns out, a lot. In most crises, most of what's needed is people paying attention and doing exactly what's needed. You learn to wash your hands. This, specifically and practically, may be the thing that saves your life. Not through any theory you hold about germ transmission, you're years away from that theory being accessible to you, but through the practical instinct that contact with illness requires careful response. The instinct was right even when the theoretical framework supporting it was wrong. Sometimes the body knows before the mind has the words. The city outside goes on. This is what cities do. They go on. They've been going on since before Broad Street was Broad Street, when this neighbourhood was fields at the edge of a smaller London, and they'll go on after the street is renamed and the houses are rebuilt and the pump is a monument. 500,000 people in London in 1854, each one of them with a room somewhere, or trying to find one. Each one of them with a particular set of sounds they fall asleep to, the specific urban lullaby of their specific street. Somewhere in Mayfair, in a house that costs more than Crane's dispensary will gross in 5 years, someone is lying awake worrying about a different set of problems. And in the East End, where the next outbreak will hit in a few years, people are asleep in rooms you'd describe as impossibly crowded if you hadn't seen Susanna Court, in houses that stack lives vertically the way Broad Street does. The same architecture of density, the same proximity to water sources and waste. The city breathes. The pump stands in the street with its handle on, water cold in the pipe below, the September night around it. John Snow is somewhere in this city, in his house on Sackville Street, perhaps working on the monograph, perhaps sleeping. The data is in him, mapped and analysed, ready to be published, ready to begin the long, slow process of changing what medicine knows about how disease moves through the world. Mr. Crane is asleep above the shop, with the methodical soundness of a man who has done what was needed today, and trusts that tomorrow will also have what's needed. The city breathes. Your breathing has slowed. The particular deceleration of a body that has been running at crisis speed for days, finally in the quiet of the room, beginning to understand that the crisis has a different quality now. Not over, but changed. The tide has turned. Your hands are at rest. The chapped knuckles, the still faint camphor smell that lives in the skin now, familiar as your own hand. These hands have wrung out cloths and counted out drops and written down names and held the flask of clean water steady while someone drank, and carried the bottles from the shelf to the counter and back again, hundreds and hundreds of times in 8 months of ordinary work and 3 days of extraordinary. They are at rest on the cot, just hands. They're enough. Tomorrow they'll be at the counter again. The ordinary line of customers with their ordinary ailments, the supply order, the ledger, Mr. Crane's precise and unhesitating hand writing the record of what was sold, and to whom, and for what condition. The record that may matter some day. That will be read by someone, some future investigator who comes to this neighbourhood to understand what happened here, who finds the ledger in an archive and opens it and reads the names and the dates and the notations. The names: John Carow, Martha Cooper, Robert Doyle, the woman in the court in the new black dress, the girl on the step in the grey dress saying, "Mum said stay here," the woman with the 2 buckets and the yoke, filling her buckets in the dawn light on September 3rd before the handle came off. All of them part of this. All of them in the data, in the record, in you. The church bells somewhere in the distance are marking the hour. You've stopped counting which hour. It's late. It's the deep part of the night, the part that belongs to sleep rather than to waking, and your body knows this even if the bells are still ringing. The last sound you register is the street, not any specific sound from the street, not a cart or a voice or the pump, just the street itself, the low continuous presence of a city that runs all night, the undertone of the vast and ceaseless mechanism of London, which was here before you arrived and will be here long after, carrying its water and its goods and its people and its ideas and its diseases and its cures through the centuries like a river carries everything. It will build the sewers, it will name the germ, it will learn slowly what Jon Snow already knows, and what Mr. Crane suspects, and what you wrote in your rough approximation of a map on a piece of paper in the back of a dispensary on Silver Street, Soho. It will change. Cities change. The things that were wrong get corrected, not quickly, not without resistance, not without the years of evidence gathering and the patient standing in front of boards and vestries and committees with ledgers and maps, and the refusal to simplify, the refusal to make the evidence say something easier than what it says. But the change happens. The pump handle comes off, not just once, not just on the 4th of September 1854, but permanently, irrevocably, in the slow time of ideas. And you were here, in this room, on this street. Running errands on the days when running errands was the work that needed doing. That's enough. You are warm enough. You're safe enough. You've done enough today. Let the street carry itself for the rest of the night. Let Mr. Crane's ledger rest in its drawer. Let the map in Dr. Snow's coat pocket wait for the morning when it will be unrolled again, examined, annotated, made more precise. Let the city breathe. Let the room settle around you, the cold walls and the familiar ceiling and the sound of the street below. The September night of 1854 doing what September nights do, and you in it, belonging here now in the way you've been becoming over these 8 months without quite knowing it until this week made it unavoidable. Let the breathing slow. Let the thinking soften at the edges. Let the day recede. You've earned this. Let sleep come the way it came to every apprentice in every room above every shop on every crowded London street. The vast ordinary mercy of sleep, the democratic erasure, the rest that belongs to everyone equally, to the boy from Bishopstone and the woman in Mayfair and the waterman on the river and the watchman making his rounds through the dark courts of Soho. Let it come. The room is quiet. The street breathes. The pump stands in the dark. And somewhere, in the deep and specific silence of a city at its most rested hour, the weight of what you've seen and done and survived this week settles into place, alongside everything else you've been carrying, all the knowledge, all the names, all the hands held and cloths wrung and distances run, and becomes part of you. This is how it goes, in the end. Not triumph, not resolution, just the work done and the record kept, and the night having done what nights do, absorbing the day. Sleep now. The morning will come, the same as it came on September 5th, the same as it came on every morning before and every morning after. The bells and the street and the smell of coal smoke and the ordinary city assembling itself, piece by piece from the dark. But that's tomorrow. Right now, there's only this. The quiet, the dark, the slow, generous arrival of rest. Good night.